Welcome all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Cucaruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Connecting with Conservation, the only podcast that goes behind the scenes to look at the business of conservation in our country. I'm John Gassett with the Wildlife Management Institute and your host with Connecting with Conservation. I'm here with my fellow co-host, Jim Cucaruto from Outdoor Stewards. How are you doing today, Jim?
I'm ready to rock and roll. But before we get rock and rolling, I did want to say that, we've been doing the Connecting with Conservation podcast for quite some time, focus on hunting, fishing, trapping, shooting, and conservation. I just heard from a buddy of mine that I had mentored in hunting, and he told me the story about, I wasn't a very good mentor. I took him out a bunch. We never harvested anything, but he told me the story. He went out with another buddy of ours and got his first pheasant. And just the thrill of hearing something, 50-year-old guy telling me about, finally harvesting something. It's such a great feeling as a mentor. So I want to remind our listeners, if you hunt, fish, trap, or shoot, invite somebody to come with you. It's going to be a great learning experience for them and a great, teaching experience for you. So invite somebody to come with you. That's my spiel, because half the time I forget to say stuff. But now we're on to something
that you get to spend time in the outdoors.
Yes, exactly. It's a great time. Positive. And, one of the most important, I think, parts of hunting, fishing, trapping, and shooting to wildlife conservation is that trapping part. And today we've got Bryant White, who is the senior program manager at AFWA, and I'll let Bryant tell us what AFWA is. And we're going to talk about trapping and some other stuff. So Bryant, welcome. Thanks for being a guest. And wanted to tell us a little bit about you personally and then explain what AFWA is.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to be on here today. I'm really excited to be here and talk a little bit about hunting, trapping, fishing, shooting, conservation, and those types of issues. So I am a senior program manager with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and I'll give you a little bit of my personal background, if that's okay. I grew up in Middle Tennessee, outside of Nashville, on kind of a horse and cattle farm, kind of a hobby farm. And I got into hunting, fishing, shooting at a very early age. My grandfather had been a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant during World War II and the Korean War, decorated with a Silver Star. He was kind of a war hero, but he trained me and my brother to shoot, to go out hunting like we were going into combat, Hunting trip was going into combat. But no, I had some great learning experiences, great memories of going out with my grandfather, my father, my older brother, participating in those types of things. And then my brother and I started trapping when I was probably about 10 years old, and he was about 12 years old. We had a subscription to Fur Fishing Game magazine. We bought some Victor #1 long springs, mail ordered those out of the back of the magazine, and decided, we were going to be long liners, moved to Alaska. That was going to be our career. And so, that's kind of how I got into trapping. Ended up not being a long liner, but I do work in trapping. So, that kind of worked out for me. But, and they did a couple of years ago, there was an article in Fur Fishing Game about the BMPs. And when I sent that to my brother, he was like, you did it. You made the big time. So anyway, but I live out west now. I'm an avid turkey hunter. I'm a big game hunter. I hunt elk, deer, bears, pronghorn, javelina, archery, firearms, do all those kinds of things. And I'm also an avid trapper. I started with the association back in 2002, and really have spent my career with AFWA, kind of at the intersection of wildlife conservation, science, and people, and especially where wildlife and humans collide sometimes. And so that's where trapping comes in, and human wildlife conflicts, and, some of the other things that I do with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and also, hunting, being involved in that type of thing. The North American model of wildlife conservation, sustainable wildlife use are some of the things that I work on. But tell you a little bit about who the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is, for those of you who don't know. AFWA is an organization with, first of all, a lot of members. All 50 state fish and wildlife agencies plus territories are members. The Canadian provinces and territories are also members of AFWA. And then most federal agencies that manage land or habitat or wildlife in some sort of way are members of AFWA as well. So like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, USGS, National Park Service, USDA, Wildlife Services, all those organizations are members of AFWA. And we also have about, I think 60 non-government conservation organization members like Ducks Unlimited, National Wild Turkey Federation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Those types of organizations are members as well. And so that means we have a lot of smart people managing wildlife in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different landscapes. That's what really AFWA does. And we provide an opportunity for all of those agencies and NGOs to work together on, big picture conservation issues, not only at the national, but also at the international level. We have working groups, committees, presidential task forces, those types of things, where we put all these different types of agencies and NGO folks together so that they can work on big picture conservation issues. And so that's what I do with AFWA. My role focuses on a number of different things. Sustainable wildlife use and the North American model of wildlife conservation are two of the things that I work on the most. I also manage our human wildlife conflict program, our feral swine damage management program, our Bear Wise program, which teaches people to live, responsibly with black bears, to try to alleviate conflicts with black bears. And then, of course, fur bear conservation and trapping issues. I also work with the IUCN and CITES and some of those other types of organizations as well. So
Bryant, I'm a trapper as well, and have been since I was a kid. So I have a strong affinity. I've said for years, I think trappers are probably the most skilled folks in the fields and in the forest out there, because you're literally, if you're hunting, you're trying to get an animal close enough where you can get a shot at it. With the trapper, you're trying to make an animal come from maybe a mile away to put its foot in a 2-inch circle, and that's a different level of skill and expertise than most people experience. But it is a controversial topic, as you're very well aware, and but it's highly regulated. I think a lot of people, there's a lot of misconceptions about trapping. It is extremely highly regulated, including state and in some cases federal regulations, but also these BMPs that you're talking about. Those are additional standards that we encourage people to go by to make sure that the trapping techniques are humane and that sort of thing. So tell us a little bit about the BMPs and how they relate to trapping in North America.
Okay, yeah. So we use the acronym BMP, which stands for Best Management Practices for Trapping. AFWA started the Best Management Practices for Trapping program all the way back in 1997. So this has been going on for, right at 30 years now. And really the goal of the BMP program is to evaluate different types of traps, all types of traps that we use to capture 23 species of fur bears, to make sure that we can capture those animals humanely, safely, selectively, and then also importantly, efficiently, to make sure that those traps really work to capture those animals in a safe and humane sort of way. And so we conduct field projects on an annual basis. We've conducted over 600 individual field projects across 45 different states and tested some 750 trap types, since we started this program. And so, but our goal was simply to evaluate traps, to make sure that we could capture animals humanely. And then also, an important part of this program is to educate anyone that's out there using traps, the trapping community, whether they're researchers, whether they're doing damage control, whether they're a fur harvester, whatever they're doing with trapping, to make sure that they know what those best traps are so that they can use those. So we do a lot of outreach and education in various ways with the trapping community, and then also, educating the public about trapping, why it's so important for agencies to be able to use this. And we do all of those types of things through the BMP program.
Well, let's hit on that. Why is trapping so important to wildlife conservation?
Yeah, well, I think a lot, one of the difficult things is helping the public understand why trapping is so important. The public has a lot of misconceptions, about trapping and what it is, and some members of the public don't even know that there is a wildlife agency maybe in their state, and that sort of thing. And so, getting this information out to folks is really important. But there are a lot of different reasons that agencies use trapping. We use it to protect endangered species, there are nesting shorebirds, black-footed ferrets, different things like that really have to be, manage predation, so that they can have nesting success, sea turtles, shore nesting birds, those types of things. We've also used it to reintroduce species that were either extirpated or endangered. River otters is probably one of the greatest success stories that there is. There were 22 different states that reintroduced river otters starting all the way back in the 1970s through the early 2000s, I guess, and reintroduced something like 4,000 river otters in those 22 different states. And now river otters are thriving, and they've actually recovered across the vast majority of their range in the United States. The same is true with beavers. A lot of people don't realize that early on, beavers were extirpated. There were states where there were absolutely no beavers left at all because of, unregulated harvest, habitat degradation, and those types of things. And beavers were captured, relocated, reintroduced, across the United States. And of course, beaver populations, we estimate there's somewhere between 10 to 15 million beavers in North America now. And they've, really been reestablished in their range as well, but a lot of other species. But agencies use trapping also just for regulated fur harvest, so the public can participate in this activity. They use it to control human-wildlife conflicts, to protect human health and safety, trapping around airports, protecting infrastructure, those types of things. And then agencies use carcasses and jawbones, teeth, things that they collect from the trapping community to evaluate populations of different species. And so it's really important for agencies to have that information so that they can keep tabs on their population to see if that population is growing, declining, stable, what's going on. Also determining presence, absence, is a population expanding if we're capturing otters in a place where we've never captured them before. We know that population is expanding. If we're not capturing them where we used to, that population may be declining or something like that. So agencies use trapping for all those different reasons, and it's very important that they be able to do that, and that was one of the goals of the BMP program too, to make sure that we could sustain regulated trapping programs, because agencies need this tool to for effective conservation and managing fur bear species and habitats as well.
Yeah, it seems to me like there's sort of been an evolution in trapping from, from the traditional fur markets that you think of from the time we colonized the states till, probably somewhere in the mid 70s, early 80s, when there's just, downward pressure on furs. People, they sort of fell out of favor with a lot of folks. The European Union doesn't care a whole lot for fur trade. So, we went from the bulk of the trappers out there trapping for the fur market now to where I'd say more of them are trapping for, like you said, for nuisance species or human wildlife conflict, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you guys want to get into this now, but we conducted a survey in 2024, I guess it was. So, of trappers in North America. I think we had nearly 10,000 trappers across the United States that participated in that survey. And one of the things that we asked them about were motivations. Why do you participate in this activity? And the number one answer was wildlife management. And so, trapping for fur and the economics was not even in the top three reasons that people participate in this activity anymore. And so wildlife management had a lot to do with it. And I think we understand that as meaning, in some cases helping to reduce predation, on ground nesting birds, on deer, on different species that people like to hunt. And so that's a big part of why people are into trapping now. And we've conducted this survey now 4 times, I suppose, over the last 30 years or so. We try to do it every 10 years or something like that to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of what species are important to trappers, what trap types they're using, those types of things, the economics, the demographics, and all those sorts of issues relative to trapping. But one of the things that we did notice this time is that there was a fairly major uptick in the number of people participating in trapping. When we conducted the survey in 2014, 2015, there were about 180,000 trappers we estimated in the United States. And then more recently, when we conducted the survey, we estimate that there are somewhere around 410,000 now. So that's a pretty big increase in the number of trappers. And as I said, the motivations are quite different now. I think the species that trappers are interested in really back that motivation up because, the top 3 species were raccoons, coyotes, and beavers. And so, it kind of backs up that, a lot of people are doing this for wildlife management reasons or habitat management types of reasons. When they're targeting those types of species, for sure.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I say it just about every episode how managing land, fish, and wildlife conservation is complex. And you kind of mentioned as you were discussing what AFWA is as that overriding group and all the efficiencies that you're having by having such a group, so you can teach people, okay, we've already done this, so we don't have too many silos out there. People still like to have their own little silos, but I appreciate what you and AFWA are doing. And, going back to that survey again, it was 400 pages. I scrolled through it and I didn't see it, but I thought we had talked about, or one of the other guests or something, that homesteaders are now getting into, non-traditional trappers. Like you grew up trapping. John is a nuisance trapper. But I think there's a new crop of new folks that are out there doing it that are just, want to manage their gardens and their properties and stuff.
Yeah.
And
that is, and we would probably throw that under wildlife management to a certain extent. If people are, doing some gardening and they're having some issues with different species, maybe getting into that garden, they're going to trap those animals. And then I think there's also, especially for that segment, wanting to use that fur to make their own products, maybe make their own mittens or hats or whatever it is, that you can make from these different types of furs. Obviously, your imagination is the limit, I suppose, in terms of what you can do with fur, because people have been using fur, for thousands of years for about everything that you can think of. And so a lot of folks are definitely getting into that. And that may be one of the motivations for them getting out there to trap, is that they want to be able to make their own products with the fur that they harvest.
Well, I think they figure out that it's more durable than you think it is. It holds up well. It's in some cases, beaver and otter are waterproof. They don't take on water very well, and they're warm. So, but there's a lot of other products. I think maybe our listeners don't understand is, trapping is not just always about the fur, because there's lots of things you can take off of an animal, whether it's castor glands out of beavers to make your own scents, or there are people sell bones and skulls, and all that. There's markets for all these pieces, and to be honest, not all of them, but a lot of them you can eat. I mean, I've eaten a lot of beavers, and they're really good table fare.
Yep. Yeah, and there are still markets, in some places in the United States for raccoon carcasses, muskrat carcasses, nutria carcasses. Those animals are all very edible, and there are markets for those.
Yeah. And so sometimes you see these things pop up. Like I know this year, not that long ago, all of a sudden striped skunks pelts were selling for, they were $60-$70 a pelt. So it's usually some, unique niche that we had it happen with otters back in the mid 2000s when I was in Kentucky, where otters went to $130 a pelt from, 25. And well, our trapper numbers went up that year. License sales went up because, everybody could make money on otters. But usually those higher priced fur items are these days are more one-off type things. Would that be fairly accurate?
Yeah, I think that's fair. The beaver market has been good, for the past few years. Beaver pelts have been up. Skunks, as you mentioned, and occasionally raccoons will, gain some good prices, and we haven't seen that happen probably in at least 10 years or so. But that used to be something that happened quite a bit. And of course, bobcats. Bobcats are a very important species to trappers, across the United States, especially Western trappers, because of the value of those pelts. But, bobcats is something that has maintained its value, even though the fur market, most prices have gone down. Bobcats have really maintained their value. So.
Yeah, I know we've had a couple other guests on, and if you're listening now and you want to learn more about trapping, you can go look through past episodes of Connecting with Conservation podcast. Jason Wisniewski and Jake DeBow, and we've had others talk about it as well. But before I forget, I wanted to mention that AFWA has a free online video education on trapping. Is that correct, or what's in that course?
Yeah, so we have a North American trapper education course that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, we developed that, kind of through the BMP program. I think that first became available in about 2003, so it's been out there for a while. It went online in about 2012, 13, something like that, and then recently we partnered to keep that online with the International Hunter Education Association, or the IHEA. And one of the reasons we did that is because our program is approved, it's certified by the IHEA. It meets all the learning objectives and standards that are in place. IHEA developed, along with AFWA, trapper education standards for North America. And so our course meets those standards. But we partnered with IHEA so that we could get maybe more use, more uptake out of that course and have it promoted through IHEA. But basically that course, it's a comprehensive course. It walks people through modern trapping, ethics, safety, regulations, wildlife biology, best management practices, and then, of course, just responsible trapping, how to use body grip traps, foothold traps, foot encapsulating traps, cable restraint devices, snares, cage traps, all those, there are chapters on all those different types of devices and how to use them to capture different species, safely and humanely. And so it's really a one-stop shop. And there are a lot of agencies that use that course to certify trappers in their state. Really, any agency can use that because we offer it free. And the association, we developed a kind of a position statement, and all the state agency directors agreed that they could use that course to certify trappers. And so it's still, every state has to sort of incorporate that into their trapper education program, but it is a course that anybody can take for free. And in some states, that's all you need to do to get certified to trap. So, but it's a great course. There are 16 chapters. You go through, you read through each chapter, and then at the end of the course, you take a 50-question quiz. If you don't pass the quiz the first time, you can take it, again. You can keep taking the quiz essentially until you pass. It has different questions every time because I had to develop like 500 questions. So every time you take the quiz, there are going to be different questions, but that's how that works. And so that course is out there and it's available, and it really provides an important standardization of trapper education for North America.
Yeah. So there's, obviously there's a lot of reasons for all these additional safeguards on trapping because it can be controversial, and you're kind of been in the thick of it for a long time now. What dispel the number one myth that non-trappers think occurs about trapping?
Well, so I'll give you four. How about that?
Give me four. That'll work.
You mentioned, John, earlier that trapping is a highly regulated activity. Most members of the public don't know that. They don't understand that trapping, that there are seasons, that there are certain trap types that you can use. That there may be bag limits and all these types of things, and law enforcement and laws, and they may not really understand that. And so one of the things that we talk with one of the things that we mention when we're talking with the public is that trapping is a highly regulated activity. That makes people a lot more comfortable with the activity. Another common misconception is that the public has is that if we remove animals from the landscape, we're decreasing that population, and eventually, we're going to cause some species to become endangered. And one of the things we help people understand is that, the species that we trap are abundant. The regulations that we have in place make sure that we can harvest those species sustainably. We're not going to over harvest them. The public doesn't understand the compensatory and additive mortality and those types of things that we understand as wildlife biologists. And so helping folks understand that species are abundant is very important. Also, when people think about trapping, they one of the things we get is, oh, those cruel traps with teeth, that they've seen in cartoons, that Wile E. Coyote's using to try to catch the roadrunner or something like that, and so we talk about the BMP program, how we know that we can capture fur bears very humanely. All the trap research that we've done using, standards developed by the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, which is the most authoritative standard setting body in the world. That, those are the folks that develop the standards that we use to evaluate traps and their humaneness. So we talk about that, and then people don't understand all the benefits of trapping, and we talk about that as well, how we use it to protect endangered species, reintroduce populations, human health and safety, protecting infrastructure, human wildlife conflicts, all those types of things. They don't understand that trapping is used in a lot of that, and so we address those issues as well. And those are our four key talking points, by the way, when it comes to trapping. Regulated, abundant, humane, and lots of benefits. So,
well, the humane one always decades ago when I taught wildlife techniques courses, I would but basically it was undergraduates that were coming into wildlife conservation programs, and many of which didn't trap and had that same misconception. But during my lecture, set a number two. Back then they were number ones, 1.5s, 2s, whatever. All the numbering has changed now, but set one while I'm talking, and then put my hand in it while I'm giving a lecture. And it's literally it snaps on you, but it doesn't break bones, doesn't tear skin. Now you won't pull out of it, without help. You got to have somebody to help you open it. But it's like the perception, like you say, whether it's from television or cartoons or just their mental perception of what these things do, and what they actually do is two totally different things. And I used to tell people that about cable restraints. It's basically like putting a leash on your dog. If I'm catching coyotes with cables, they're standing there like they're on a leash, when I show up at the trap site. So they're not injurious. If done correctly, they're not injurious to the animal, the target animals. And they're not injurious to non-targets in most cases. So it's just, I think that's just, people get hung up on that, and then all of a sudden trapping is bad. It's like, well, no, it does all these other great things. And it's even the part you're focusing on really isn't, a major issue.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's a good point, John. One of the things that when I'm talking with groups about foothold traps, they're concerned about, oh, isn't it squeezing their foot really hard, clamping force and that sort of thing. And, your average, let's say you're a 1.5 or number 2 size trap, it generates about the same clamping force, about 45 to 60 pounds of clamping force that you can generate with your hand. That trap is not squeezing that animal's foot any harder than you could squeeze it with your hand and hold on to it. That's exactly what that trap is doing. You could grab that animal and hold it by the foot. The trap's doing the same thing.
Yep. And on top of that, they've got other modifications. There are no teeth. They've got padded jaws now. They have offset jaws, laminated, all these things that are designed to make it easier on the animal and not damage, not doing it, not because you may catch something you want to release, or that we're helping on a restoration project where you're moving it somewhere else. So,
Well, Bryant, you mentioned a couple times during that, the infrastructure damage. Give us an example of that. What animals are causing what type of infrastructure damage?
Well, there are quite a few species that can cause infrastructure damage, but I would probably mention beavers, as the number one. Beavers are fantastic, ecosystem engineers. They can do some great things, create some beautiful habitat. They can also destroy infrastructure. And so, building dams that cause flooding. They like to plug up culverts, running water. Beavers don't like running water. They like to plug it up and stop it, and create ponds and pools. And so when they plug up culverts or they build dams that flood roads and bridges and a lot of times homes, I think probably, there was a famous story when I was actually living in Missouri back in the early 2000s, I think it was, where the Mississippi River had flooded and one of the levees broke, and they finally determined that the reason the levee broke was because muskrats, had burrowed into the levee, and it flooded hundreds of homes. And so that's the type of damage, that some of these fur bearers can do. But I would especially point to beavers and muskrats for some of that infrastructure type of damage.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that. And yeah, I'd heard about the muskrat story too. So we talked about a lot. I'm sure that there's, more we want to get into. But before we go, I know you have a video series out. Communication is the key, because the people not friendly to trapping are good at communicating, and maybe trappers individually are not so good at it. So AFWA's kind of taking the lead with a new video series on trapping. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the new video series is designed really for two different things. One, we wanted to try to recruit more trappers from the hunting community. Hunters and trappers share a lot of the same motivations. They like to do the same sorts of things. We know that people from the hunting community are certainly getting into trapping. We know that 95% of trappers are hunters, 92% of trappers fish. So, we all kind of like the same types of things, whether we're hunters or trappers. And so one of our motivations with these videos was to try to recruit, more hunters to become trapping, using it for whatever reason they want to, wildlife management and that type of thing. The other primary objective for these videos is just to educate the public, so that agencies can use these videos to educate the public about trapping in general, why trapping is important, why they use it, how humane it is, how safe it is, how much people actually get out of that activity, why it's important to people to be able to do that. And so, that was really the impetus of that particular video series. We also have a lot of videos in the North American Trapper Education course that we developed with a guy named Randy Newberg, on your own adventures, fresh tracks, on just trapper education, how to use body grip traps, how to use foothold traps. I think we developed about 16 different videos that are incorporated into that North American Trapper Education course. So we have a lot of videos out there that folks can use and view and are always welcome to.
All right. Well, again, thanks for telling us about regulated trapping. And where can folks find, that survey, these videos, that free course? Where can folks go for that?
So the course is on the IHEA website. I think it's, I'll make sure I send you guys the link so that you'll have that. Furbearmanagement.com. That's pretty easy to remember. Furbearmanagement.com, if you can spell it. That is kind of our clearinghouse for all the material that we have produced through the AFWA Fur Bear Conservation Technical Work Group and our Best Management Practices for Trapping program. So we have science briefs, which are little 1 or 2 page documents that address critical issues relative to trapping. One is on, the use of black bears. One is on predation management. The other's on the humaneness of trapping, animal welfare and trapping, selectivity and trapping, those types of issues, how trapping fits within the North American model of wildlife conservation. All of our peer-reviewed publications and white papers, all of our survey reports from all the different types of surveys that we have done of the public and of agencies and trappers. And so furbearmanagement.com is the place to go to find all that. And then we also have a best management practices YouTube site, and you can see all of our videos there. The newer videos aren't there yet, but they'll be there soon. But all the videos that we developed with Randy Newberg are on that site.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, Bryant, thanks for coming on. And thanks for all the hard work you and AFWA have done on trapping and making sure that we have good BMPs and make sure that it is well regulated. And you've done a great job with that. It was needed, and y'all fit the bill. So appreciate that. To our listeners, if you had never thought about it, or you sort of thought you knew about it but didn't, hopefully this helped you understand trapping a little bit more. And more importantly, remember that hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters pay for conservation in our country through their license purchases, through their equipment purchases, the excise tax that we talk about so much on Connecting with Conservation. That's how conservation is paid for in this country. So even if you don't participate in those activities, if you like clean air, clean water, healthy outdoors, healthy environment, support your hunting and trapping and angling community, because they're the ones helping to pay for it. Hope you like this episode. If you did, please click the subscribe button and give us a like or a thumbs up. And other than that, we'll see you in the woods or on the water. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.